She was called the Miracle Baby, born mid-flight over the Atlantic, a symbol of life, of hope, of the impossible made real. But 5 years later, that same child was hidden behind closed doors, forgotten by the world that once cheered for her. No one remembered her name. No one asked about the miracle. Except one man, her grandfather, and his loyal dog, Max. When the world became too cruel, when love turned into silence, it was Max who heard what no one else could. A child's heartbeat, fading into fear. This story isn't about fame or tragedy. It's about what comes after. About how one German shepherd's loyalty became the light in a house that had gone dark. Because sometimes, miracles don't happen once. Sometimes, they return years later, in the shape of a dog who simply refused to let a little girl die unseen. The night sky stretched endlessly over the Atlantic, dark and alive, like a vast ocean turned upside down. 30,000 feet below, the waves moved in rhythm with the hum of the engines. Inside Flight 207, the air was restless. The fasten seatbelt sign blinked red as turbulence rippled through the cabin, shaking trays and hearts alike. A sharp gasp broke the monotony. From seat 18B, a young woman bent forward, clutching her swollen belly. Sarah Carter, 27, pale but determined. She whispered between clenched teeth, It's too early." Her husband, Daniel, sprang to his feet. "Someone help us! My wife! She's having contractions!" His voice cracked, the kind that carried both fear and disbelief. Flight attendants rushed toward them, faces tightening as the plane jolted again. "Sir, please sit down," one said firmly, gripping the back of his seat. "We'll call for medical assistance on board." Her voice was calm, but her eyes darted toward the cockpit. Sarah moaned, a sound raw and primal, the sound of life forcing its way into the world, against all odds. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Daniel knelt beside her, holding her trembling hand. "Just breathe, honey. Just breathe." The captain's voice came through the intercom, calm but taut. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and keep calm." But in row 18, calm was no longer an option. A middle-aged woman stood up despite the warning. "I'm a nurse," she said. She knelt beside Sarah, motioning for Daniel to support her from behind. "Okay, sweetheart. We're doing this together. Deep breaths. You're doing fine." The turbulence worsened. Luggage rattled overhead. Someone whispered a prayer. Another reached for a rosary. The hum of fear spread through the cabin, like static. And yet, amid the chaos, there was an odd kind of unity. Strangers exchanging glances. Breaths held in collective suspense. The nurse wiped Sarah's forehead with a napkin. "You're almost there. I can see the head." Daniel's hand trembled. "She's coming. She's really coming." The nurse nodded sharply. "One more push. Right now." For a moment, the plane seemed to still, just for that heartbeat between worlds. And then, a cry split the air. Not of fear, but of life. A baby's wail, fierce, defiant, beautiful. The cabin erupted in gasps and laughter. Applause broke out. Tears flowed freely. The turbulence stopped, as if the storm itself had bowed before the tiny miracle. The nurse held up the infant, red-faced and squirming. "She's breathing. She's perfect." Daniel sobbed, holding his face in his hands. Sarah, exhausted, smiled weakly as the nurse laid the baby in her arms. "She's strong," she whispered. "Emily Rose Carter." The name fell softly, like a prayer. Passengers craned their necks to see the newborn, wrapped in a thin blanket, bathed in the warm glow of the reading lights. Someone started recording. Another offered their scarf to keep the baby warm. In a world often divided, for that brief moment, everyone was one heartbeat, one miracle, one hope. Daniel kissed Sarah's forehead. "You did it. You both did." A flight attendant radioed the cockpit. "Mother and baby stable. They're both okay." Even the captain exhaled audibly over the comm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a new passenger aboard Flight 207. A little girl has just been born, safe and healthy." The cabin exploded in cheers. A young boy whispered, "She's the sky baby." Someone else murmured, "The miracle girl of Flight 207. The phrase spread from seat to seat, aisle to aisle, until the whole cabin was whispering it. A name born in the sky. Sarah looked down at Emily, tears streaking her cheeks. The baby's eyes blinked open, twin orbs of gold and blue. "You came from the clouds," she whispered. "You were never meant to fall." Outside the window, the storm clouds thinned. The moon appeared, pale and steady, lighting up the ocean far below, as if the heavens themselves had paused to watch. Hours later, the pilot announced an emergency landing in New York for medical assistance. When the wheels touched down, applause filled the cabin once again. Cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed the tarmac. A photograph would later go viral, a tired but radiant Sarah holding her newborn, Daniel leaning close, his hand over both of them. The world fell in love with the story. News anchors called her the miracle child born between heaven and earth. For a while, their small Ohio home overflowed with letters, gifts, and blessings, a story of life, of triumph, in the most impossible place. But the sky, as beautiful as it was, has its shadows too. As the ambulance doors closed around Sarah and her child, the nurse caught Daniel's arm. "You're lucky, you know," she said gently. "Some miracles are given only once." Daniel smiled weakly, not knowing those words would haunt him for years to come. Because not every miracle survives the fall from heaven. Far above the city, clouds gathered once more, soft, silent witnesses to what they had seen. The world would remember the miracle girl of Flight 207, but only the sky would remember the cost. And as the plane that had carried them drifted into the horizon, its engines whispering through the night, a faint cry echoed in memory, fragile, pure, and fleeting, like a spark carried by the wind, promising hope, but foreshadowing heartbreak. 5 years later, the house on the quiet street in suburban Ohio no longer sounded like a home. The laughter that once filled its walls had faded, leaving behind an echo that seemed to haunt the empty rooms. From the outside, it looked perfect. Trimmed hedges, blue shutters, a mailbox polished every Sunday. But inside, everything was too clean, too quiet, too staged, like a photograph of happiness instead of the real thing. The framed news clipping still hung by the doorway. Miracle baby born on Flight 207. The photo showed a younger Daniel Carter, holding an infant wrapped in hospital linen, smiling through tears. The article was yellowed now, but Sarah's name was still clear beneath the headline. Sarah Carter, 27, hailed as a hero mother. Only one person in the house looked at it anymore, a small girl with honey-brown hair and wide gray eyes. Emily Rose Carter. She stood on her tiptoes each morning, tracing her mother's face with her finger. whispering, "Hi, Mama," before stepping away quietly, afraid her father might hear. Sarah was gone. The complications from childbirth had taken her, just hours after that miraculous landing. Emily had never known her mother's voice, only her scent, faint and warm, still clinging to a silk scarf she kept hidden under her pillow. Daniel never talked about her. He was a good man once, kind, careful, the sort who smiled with his eyes. But grief had hollowed him. He still went to work, still paid the bills, but part of him had stayed behind, in that airplane cabin, frozen in the moment he'd watched his wife's heart monitor flatline. He met Melissa Reed 2 years later, Sarah's childhood friend. She came by one day with a casserole and a carefully chosen smile, saying she wanted to help. Daniel had been too tired to refuse. At first, she brought warmth into the house again. Flowers on the kitchen counter, candles that smelled like cinnamon, polite laughter that made neighbors believe healing was possible. For a time, even Emily tried to believe it too. But something about Melissa's laughter never reached her eyes. "Emily, honey," Melissa would say in her sing-song voice, brushing imaginary dust off the girl's shoulder. "You should call me Mom now, okay?" Emily would nod, but never speak. Instead, she'd retreat to the window seat, her favorite hiding spot, behind the sheer curtains. From there, she could watch the world without being seen. She'd clutch her mother's old scarf, worn soft by years of secret holding, and breathe in its faded scent, jasmine, and something gentle. Sometimes she'd whisper into it, "Do you miss me too?" In the background, Melissa's voice filled the kitchen, rehearsing sweetness while something colder stirred beneath it. She'd laugh loudly when Daniel came home, make his favorite meals, rest her hand over his. But the moment he turned away, the light in her eyes dimmed, her smile stiffened, like porcelain. There were subtle things, too small to name, but too sharp to ignore. The way she rearranged Sarah's photos, tucked behind a plant. The way she flinched whenever Emily called her father Daddy. The way her tone changed, sugar turning to vinegar, the moment Daniel's car left the driveway. "Why don't you ever talk, Emily?" she'd ask one afternoon, voice low and tight. "You make people uncomfortable when you just stare." Emily looked down, twisting the corner of her scarf. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Melissa sighed, not out of patience, but exhaustion. "You can say sorry all you want, sweetheart, but it doesn't make you less strange." When Daniel walked in, Melissa's face brightened instantly. "Oh, there you are! I was just helping Emily with her drawings." She held up a paper Emily hadn't even touched. Daniel smiled absently, kissed his wife on the forehead, and sat down to eat. Emily stayed silent. The scarf in her hands felt like the only truth left. The house itself began to change. Small details outsiders wouldn't notice. Curtains stayed drawn more often. The piano Sarah used to play sat under a thin veil of dust. A single cracked teacup never got replaced. Even laughter, when it came, sounded rehearsed, like an actor repeating lines. Sometimes Daniel caught glimpses of it, the tension, the strange distance between his daughter and his new wife. But he was too tired to dig deeper. When Melissa said Emily was just shy or acting out, he nodded, wanting peace more than truth. At night, when everyone was asleep, Emily would crawl out of bed, tiptoe down the hall, and sit in front of the window again. The moonlight would pour in softly, touching her hair like a mother's hand. She'd press her face into the scarf and whisper stories to the stars. stories she imagined her mother might have told her. In one of them, she was back on the airplane, wrapped in warm arms, surrounded by cheers. She liked to think she still carried a bit of the sky inside her, even if no one else saw it anymore. One evening, while cleaning, Melissa found the scarf hidden under Emily's pillow. She held it up like a piece of evidence, frowning. "What's this old thing?" Emily froze. "It was Mama's," she said softly. Melissa's smile was thin. "Oh, sweetheart, you can't keep living in the past." She folded it neatly, too neatly, and placed it on a high shelf, out of reach. "We have to make new memories now, don't we?" When she left the room, Emily climbed onto a chair, stretching her small arms until she could barely graze the edge of the fabric. But Melissa's voice cut through the air, sharp. "Leave it there, Emily," I said. "We're moving forward." Emily stepped down quietly, eyes burning, heart shrinking. That night, Daniel found her asleep on the floor beside her bed, her fingers still reaching upward. He sighed, carried her to bed, tucked her in, and never noticed the missing scarf. Outside, the wind howled softly, brushing against the window like a sigh. The moon watched silently, as if it too knew that something in that house had begun to fade. A warmth, a laughter, a small girl's light. And somewhere deep inside those walls, beneath the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock, the house seemed to whisper its own secret. It remembered what joy used to sound like. It just didn't know how to find it anymore. The miracle girl, once born among the clouds, now lived in the shadows, a ghost of her own story. And in the stillness of that Ohio night, even the stars seemed to blink a little dimmer, as if mourning the laughter that used to live there. Morning came slowly to the Carter household. The winter sun hovered behind a curtain of gray, weak and unsure, spilling only a pale light across the kitchen floor. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second echoing through the quiet, like a reminder of something lost. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air. Melissa Reed Carter stood at the counter, her hair unbrushed, a silk robe hanging loosely around her shoulders. A letter from her employer lay open beside the sink, words printed in cold, corporate language. "Due to restructuring, your position has been terminated effective immediately." Her hand tightened on the page until it crumpled. She dropped it into the trash and stared out the window, frost tracing delicate patterns on the glass. The coffee pot hissed softly. Behind her, Emily sat at the table, small and quiet, tracing circles in her oatmeal with a spoon. She didn't speak. She had learned in recent months that silence was safer. Melissa's voice broke the stillness. "Are you going to eat that? Or just play with it?" Emily startled slightly, her spoon clinking against the bowl. I'm eating," she whispered. Melissa exhaled, long and sharp. "You're so slow in the mornings, just like your mother was." The words came out before she could stop them, heavy, bitter. She didn't apologize. Daniel wasn't home. He had left before sunrise, rushing off to work with his usual distracted kiss on Melissa's cheek. He didn't notice the tension that hung in the air, or perhaps he didn't want to. He had told himself that Melissa was trying, that Emily just needed time to adjust. But time wasn't fixing anything. It was quietly breaking everything instead. Melissa picked up her coffee cup, stared into it as though the dark liquid might hold an answer. "You know, Emily, when I was your age, I didn't have anyone to make me breakfast. I had to grow up fast. Maybe that's what you need too. Emily looked down, her shoulders curling inward. I can make my own breakfast, she murmured. The faint defiance in her tone struck something inside Melissa. A small, sharp sting of anger she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was envy, maybe guilt, or maybe the reminder that the house still carried Sarah's ghost, tucked inside every giggle and kind word Emily still remembered. Melissa's hand slipped. The coffee cup tumbled from her grasp, shattering on the floor. Hot liquid splattered her bare feet. The sound was sharp, violent, a crack that filled the room, like thunder. Emily gasped, instinctively flinching, arms wrapping around herself. Her chair scraped backward with a screech. Melissa froze, breathing hard. She looked down at the shards, the dark coffee bleeding between them. Her reflection shimmered in the mess, fractured, scattered, broken. The silence stretched, then softly, but coldly. Melissa said, "Look what you made me do." Emily blinked, confused. I didn't. But Melissa was already reaching for a towel, her movements quick, mechanical. You're always underfoot, always watching. I can't even think when you're in the room. She crouched down, dabbing at the spill, muttering under her breath. Just like her. Always staring, always judging. Emily wanted to help. She knelt beside her stepmother and picked up a shard of porcelain, a piece painted with delicate blue flowers. It caught the morning light, gleaming like a sliver of ice. "Don't touch that!" Melissa snapped. She snatched the fragment from Emily's hand. The motion was too quick, too rough. A thin line of blood appeared on Emily's finger. The girl drew her hand back, eyes wide, lips trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, barely audible. Melissa looked at her, truly looked. And for one fleeting second, guilt flickered across her face. She reached out, hesitated, then pulled her hand back. "Go to your room," she said flatly. "I'll clean this up." Emily obeyed without a sound, her footsteps soft as she retreated down the hallway. When the door closed, Melissa sank to her knees, pressing her palms against the cold tile. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. "It's not my fault," she whispered. "It's not my fault." But the house seemed to disagree. The broken cup lay on the floor, its fragments scattered like tiny truths too sharp to hold. It wasn't just a cup. It was the first crack in the illusion, the first visible wound in a home pretending to be whole. Upstairs, Emily sat on her bed, holding her injured finger. It stung, but she didn't cry. She wrapped it in a tissue, careful and quiet. On her nightstand sat her mother's scarf, now faded to a soft ivory. She pressed it to her cheek, breathing in the ghost of warmth that still lived there. Through the thin walls, she heard Melissa moving downstairs. The faint clink of dishes, the whir of the vacuum, the sudden slam of a cabinet door. Every sound made her flinch. That night, dinner was silent. Daniel tried to make conversation, but Melissa smiled too brightly, too tightly, and Emily barely touched her food. When he asked if everything was okay, both answered at the same time. "Yes." "Fine." He accepted it. Afterward, Melissa stood at the sink, staring out the window into the dark yard. The reflection of the kitchen light caught her face, tired, brittle. In the window's faint glare, she saw Emily behind her, clearing the table silently, small hands trembling as she stacked the plates. "Be careful," Melissa said, not turning around. Her voice was soft, but laced with warning. "I'd hate for you to break something else." Emily froze, then nodded quickly. Upstairs. When Daniel finally turned off the lights, Melissa lingered in the kitchen. She picked up the repaired cup from the counter, glued together, still showing hairline fractures like scars. She ran her thumb along the cracks, whispering, "Perfect enough." She set it on the highest shelf, next to the photo of their wedding day. Both smiles fixed, both eyes pretending. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and soundless. Inside, a small girl hid beneath her blanket, flinching every time the wind rattled the window, mistaking it for a voice, calling her name. The house creaked as it settled, like an old body sighing under the weight of secrets. And in that quiet Ohio kitchen, the broken teacup gleamed faintly under the moonlight. The first wound in a story that would soon bleed far deeper. The playground was alive, with the sound of laughter, the kind that comes from children who still believe the world is kind. Swings creaked, sneakers slapped against asphalt. Wind carried the scent of autumn leaves and chalk dust. But in the far corner, beneath the old oak tree, Emily Carter sat alone, tracing circles in the dirt with a stick. Her sleeves were too long for the warm afternoon, pulled down to her wrists even as the sun glowed gently above her. When the wind lifted them slightly, faint bruises peeked through, small, uneven marks, like fading fingerprints. "Emily," a soft voice called. It was Ms. Porter, her teacher, a woman in her 30s, with kind eyes and the cautious patience of someone who'd learned to listen before asking. She crouched beside Emily, her skirt brushing the leaves. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" Emily nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." Ms. Porter smiled, but her eyes stayed on the bruises. "I saw you tripped on the steps yesterday," she said lightly. "Did you hurt yourself again?" Emily froze, the stick stilling in her hand. I fell." The lie slid out too smoothly for a child her age. Ms. Porter's heart ached at the sound. She had taught long enough to recognize that tone, the flat, rehearsed voice of a child who had learned that telling the truth didn't make things better. "Well," Ms. Porter said gently, "I'm glad you're okay. But if you ever need to talk, I'm always here. All right?" Emily nodded again, eyes on the ground, the teacher's. Kindness felt too bright, too fragile, like sunlight she wasn't allowed to touch. At recess, other children ran past her, chasing a red ball that bounced across the grass. A boy named Jack called, "Come play, Emily." She gave a small wave, but didn't move. She didn't want anyone close enough to see. Instead, she pulled out a small sketchbook, something she carried everywhere. Inside were pages of quiet worlds, houses with no windows, people without mouths, and always, in the background, a big dark shape with eyes like shadows. Today, she drew something different. A small figure stood behind a door. Outside, a taller woman was shouting, her mouth open wide, but her words scribbled out in red crayon. Above them, a dog, drawn with large ears and kind eyes, stood beside an old man with a cane. Her pencil moved faster now, as if her hands knew truths her voice couldn't carry. When the bell rang, she quickly closed the book, tucking it into her backpack. Inside the classroom, Ms. Porter watched her closely. During story time, Emily's eyes were distant, her small fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. When another child laughed loudly, Emily flinched. Just a flicker, but enough for Ms. Porter to notice. After class, the teacher called her gently. "Emily, can you stay for a moment?" The girl hesitated, glancing toward the window, where parents were starting to gather. "My mom's waiting." "It's okay," Ms. Porter said softly. "This will only take a minute." She closed the door halfway and knelt beside Emily's desk. "Sweetheart, I'm worried about you. You seem sad lately. And I noticed some marks on your arms. Did something happen at home?" Emily's shoulders tightened. "No, I fell." The same words, the same practiced tone. Ms. Porter hesitated. She wanted to press, but she could see the fear in Emily's eyes. Not fear of getting caught, but fear of what would happen if she spoke. So she tried another way. "Can I see what you've been drawing lately? Your art is beautiful." Emily hesitated, clutching her backpack. "It's just pictures." "Pictures can tell stories," Ms. Porter said softly. "And sometimes, stories can help us feel better." After a long silence, Emily slowly opened her sketchbook. Ms. Porter flipped through the pages, her chest tightening with each one. There were figures behind doors, a crying child, and a woman drawn larger than everyone else, her mouth always open, her hands always reaching. In one picture, the child was smaller than a chair. Ms. Porter closed the book gently, afraid her own voice might tremble. "Emily," she said softly, "thank you for showing me this. You draw very brave things." Emily blinked, not understanding. Brave? She didn't feel brave. She just felt tired. "Would it be okay," the teacher continued, "if I talk to someone about how you're feeling, just to make sure you're safe?" Emily's eyes widened. "Please don't." "Why not?" "She'll be mad. She doesn't like when people talk about our house." Miss Porter felt the air leave her lungs. She nodded slowly. "Okay, honey. We won't do anything right now. But I promise, I'll keep you safe." When school ended, Melissa arrived. Heels clicking, lipstick perfect, smile polished like glass. "There's my girl," she chirped. Ms. Porter met her at the doorway. "Mrs. Carter, could I have a quick word?" Melissa's smile didn't falter. "Of course, teacher." Inside the empty classroom, Ms. Porter spoke gently. "I've noticed a few bruises on Emily. She says she fell, but I wanted to check in. Everything all right at home?" Melissa's eyes softened with practiced ease. "Oh dear, she's so clumsy, runs into everything. I keep telling her to slow down." She gave a light laugh, warm enough to sound real. "Kids, right?" Miss Porter forced a smile, but something inside her twisted. "Of course. Thank you for understanding. I just wanted to make sure." Melissa placed a hand on her arm. "You're doing such wonderful work with her. She talks about you all the time." The lie slid smoothly, like honey over glass. As they left, Melissa's hand settled on Emily's shoulder. Not tender, but firm. To the world, it looked like affection. Only Emily knew the pressure behind it. In the parking lot, Ms. Porter watched them go. She considered calling child services, but hesitated. There wasn't enough. Not yet. Just bruises, drawings, and a quiet child. The system had rules, paperwork, proof. When Melissa's car turned the corner, Ms. Porter stood alone, clutching Emily's last drawing in her hand. It showed a house with no windows. Inside it, A small girl sat behind a locked door. At the bottom corner, drawn faintly in pencil, were two words, almost too small to read. Help me. The cabin sat at the edge of an Ohio forest, where the pines whispered secrets to the wind, and time seemed to move slower. Morning light spilled through thin curtains, falling across a wooden table cluttered with old photographs, medals, and yellowing newspaper clippings. Thomas Carter, 68, sat hunched over that table, glasses low on his nose, a cup of black coffee cooling beside him. His hands, scarred and calloused from years in the police force, trembled slightly as he unfolded the same article he had read 100 times. Miracle girl born mid-flight over the Atlantic, mother and child safe. Beneath the headline was a picture that never failed to undo him. His daughter, Sarah, glowing with exhaustion and joy, holding the newborn in her arms. Daniel stood behind them, eyes red, but smiling. And there, in the corner of the frame, the nurse who'd helped bring Emily into the world, smiling like she'd witnessed heaven itself. Thomas ran a thumb across Sarah's face, tracing her smile. The paper had worn soft there, as if time itself had wept on that spot. You'd be 32 now, he murmured. You always said you'd name your girl Emily. Said it sounded like light. A soft sound came from near the fireplace, a low, thoughtful groan. Max, his old German shepherd, lifted his head. His muzzle was graying now, his eyes clouded slightly with age, but his ears still stood sharp when Thomas spoke. Yeah, buddy, Thomas sighed, folding the paper. I was talking to her again. Max gave a small bark, as if to remind him he wasn't alone. Thomas leaned back, staring at the medals on the mantel. Service awards, commendations, a faded photograph of him in uniform beside a much younger Max, the two of them standing proud, after their last K9 rescue mission. We saved 5 people that night, he said softly. Remember that? Snowstorm on I-90. You didn't even hesitate. Max wagged his tail once, slow but steady, the way he always did when he heard his partner's voice change, that rough edge, softening with memory. Thomas's gaze drifted to another frame, Sarah, 8 years old, sitting on his shoulders at a summer fair. Her face was painted like a butterfly, her laugh frozen forever mid-flight. He swallowed hard. You were my miracle too, you know that? Before Emily ever was. He set the photo down and rubbed his temples. The silence pressed heavy around him, broken only by the ticking of an old wall clock and the crackle of the fireplace. On the table lay a postcard, Daniel's handwriting, polite but distant. Emily's doing fine. She's in school now. Melissa's a wonderful stepmother. We're doing well. No invitation to visit. No phone call. Just words on a page that felt rehearsed. Thomas frowned. He'd written back twice. Both letters had gone unanswered. Max let out a soft whine, sensing his mood. Thomas reached down, scratching behind his ears. It's been too long, huh? She's 5 now. 5 years without her grandpa. He pushed back his chair and stood, joints stiff. The morning light caught his gray hair and lined face, but there was still something sharp in his eyes. The old detective's instinct, the one that never really retired. He walked to a small shelf and pulled down a framed clipping, the same story about Flight 207, but from a local paper this time. Born between heaven and earth, it read. Underneath, someone had scribbled in pencil, a child of angels. Thomas's voice cracked as he spoke. If only the angels had stayed. Max stood up, stretching, tail sweeping the wooden floor. He padded over to the door, pawed at it lightly, then turned to look back at Thomas with quiet insistence. "You think I should go see her?" Thomas asked. Another soft bark, one of Max's rare, certain ones. Thomas smiled faintly. "You always know when I need a push." He poured out the cold coffee, rinsed the cup, and stood for a long moment at the sink, staring through the window, into the trees. The forest beyond was bathed in soft gold, but somewhere in that beauty was a silence that made him uneasy, a silence that reminded him of the space between calls he never got, the distance between him and the little girl who carried his daughter's eyes. He went to the coat rack and pulled down his old police jacket. Worn, faded, but familiar. He slipped it on, the fabric still heavy with memory. From the hook beside it, he grabbed Sarah's old scarf, a blue one she'd worn in her college graduation photo. He folded it gently and tucked it into his pocket. "Come on, partner," he said, turning to Max. "Let's go pay our girl a visit." Max's ears perked up fully now. He trotted toward the door, tail wagging, nails clicking against the floorboards. Thomas chuckled softly, the sound half fondness, half ache. Before leaving, he paused one last time at the table. He looked down at Sarah's photo, then at the small, framed newspaper story. "I'll make sure she's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "I promise." He pressed a kiss to his fingers and touched it to the glass. Outside, the cold air bit gently at his skin. The morning smelled of pine and frost, the kind of smell Sarah used to love when she was a little girl. Max trotted beside him, his breath fogging in the crisp air. As they reached the truck, Thomas hesitated. His heart thudded heavy, not from age, but from something deeper. That instinct every parent knows, that something is wrong, even without proof. He opened the passenger door. "Hop in, old boy." Max obeyed, settling into the seat with a soft grunt. His eyes were alert now, focused, almost young again. The road stretched ahead, winding between trees that whispered like ghosts. As Thomas drove, the radio played softly, an old country song about promises and second chances. He let it fill the silence. At a red light, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. Tired eyes, weathered face, and thought of the little girl he hadn't seen in too long, the one they called the miracle baby. He wondered what kind of miracle she needed now. Max shifted beside him, letting out a low, thoughtful whine. Thomas reached over, resting his hand on the dog's neck. "Don't worry, partner. We'll find her. We'll make sure she's safe." The light turned green. The truck rolled forward, and somewhere, miles ahead, in a house too quiet for laughter, a little girl stirred in her sleep, unaware that the only person who truly remembered her mother's voice was already on his way. The rain came without warning. Not a storm, not a drizzle, but that cold, steady kind that soaks through bones and memories. It was mid-afternoon, but the sky had turned the color of steel. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up as Thomas Carter steered his old truck down a narrow suburban road, headlights slicing through the gray. Beside him, Max sat upright in the passenger seat, ears twitching with every rumble of thunder. The German shepherd's nose pressed briefly against the window, fogging it with quick breaths. "Almost there, partner," Thomas murmured, voice roughened by both age and nerves. "She lives right on this street, second house on the left." He slowed to a stop before a neat two-story home, with white siding and blue shutters. The kind of house that looked warm from a distance, but somehow colder, up close. The front yard was trimmed to perfection. The porch swept clean. It was a house that wanted the world to believe everything inside was fine. Thomas turned off the engine and just sat there, staring through the rain. The rhythmic patter on the roof was the only sound. He took a deep breath, reached for his hat, and said quietly, "Let's go see our girl." The moment he opened the door, the wind slapped him with a burst of rain. He hunched his shoulders and hurried toward the porch, Max trotting close behind. By the time they reached the steps, Thomas's coat was soaked through, his breath visible in the cold air. He rang the bell once. The chime echoed faintly inside. Nothing. He knocked. Then again, harder this time. After a long pause, the door cracked open, just a few inches. Behind it stood Melissa Carter, framed in the dim light of the hallway. Her hair perfectly arranged despite the storm, her expression soft but guarded. "Oh," she said, feigning surprise. "Mr. Carter, I wasn't expecting you." Thomas removed his hat, rain dripping down his temples. "I know. I should have called first. I just wanted to see Emily." Melissa's smile tightened. "She's not feeling well. Caught a little bug. Best if she rests." Behind her, the hallway was dim, a shadowed stretch leading deeper into silence. Thomas tried to peer past her, but she shifted slightly, blocking the view. "It's been months," he said quietly. "I just want to say hello. Maybe bring her a little gift." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, stuffed dog, worn, but clean, the kind he used to give Sarah when she was little. "It's for her." Melissa's eyes flicked to it, then back to him. "That's very kind, but she's asleep. You know how kids are, when they're sick." Thomas studied her face. Her words were smooth, but something behind them felt off. The way her hand gripped the doorknob too tightly. The slight tremor in her voice. That wasn't quite concern. At his side, Max gave a low, almost inaudible growl. Melissa's gaze dropped sharply to the dog. "Does he have to do that?" "He's fine," Thomas said, calm but firm. "He's just saying hello." Max's ears flattened. His eyes, dark and alert, didn't leave her. He sniffed the air once, then again, something in the scent beneath the rain catching his attention. Thomas took a small step forward, careful but insistent. "I won't stay long. Just want her to know her grandpa hasn't forgotten her." Melissa's expression softened artificially, her tone dripping with politeness. "Of course not. She talks about you all the time." That lie hit harder than she expected. Thomas's chest tightened. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But he saw the flicker in her eyes when she said it. The same flicker he'd seen too many times in interrogation rooms, on faces that hid truths behind smiles. "Maybe I can leave this for her then?" He extended the toy again. Melissa hesitated before taking it, holding it gingerly, as if afraid it might stain her hands. "I'll make sure she gets it." The door began to close. Thomas stepped forward, rain dripping from his hat brim, voice trembling just enough to reveal the ache underneath. "Please tell her I love her, Melissa. Tell her Grandpa misses her." Melissa paused, her eyes softening for a fraction of a second, or maybe pretending to. "Of course, Dung," she said. "Now you should get out of the rain. You'll catch cold." The latch clicked. The door shut. The sound was small, but heavy. Final. The kind of sound that lingered. Thomas stood there for a long time, staring at the painted wood, his reflection faintly visible in the rainwater running down the surface. Behind him, Max whined softly, pressing his nose against the bottom of the door. "I know, boy," Thomas whispered. "I know." The rain came harder now, sheets of it falling in cold waves. His coat clung to his back, heavy with water. Still, he didn't move. The porch light flickered above them, buzzing faintly. The only warmth left. He thought of Sarah again. Her voice, her laughter, the way she used to sit on this very porch when she first brought Daniel home to meet him, the way she used to dream out loud about the life they'd have, about little Emily, and how she'd grow up surrounded by love. Now, all that was left was a locked door. Thomas reached out once more, resting his palm flat against the wood. "You can keep me out, but you can't stop me from loving her." His voice was rough, the kind that breaks in the middle of sentences. Max pressed closer to his leg, letting out another soft growl. Not anger this time, but frustration. He sniffed the air again, ears tilting back. There was something under the smell of rain, something faint, like fear, or dust, or maybe sorrow itself. Thomas finally turned back toward the truck. His steps were slow, deliberate. Each one splashed through small puddles, his shoes soaking through. He opened the door, letting Max climb in first. Before starting the engine, he looked once more at the house. The curtains remained perfectly still, the windows dark. Behind them, a little girl might have been sleeping or watching. He couldn't know. He wiped the rain from his eyes, though he wasn't sure anymore if it was rain at all. "Let's go home, partner," he said quietly. The truck engine rumbled to life, headlights slicing through the rain as they pulled away. From the rearview mirror, Thomas watched the house disappear behind the blur of water. He didn't see the small movement. In the upstairs window, a flicker of pale light, the faintest shape of a child's hand pressed against the glass before vanishing into shadow. The road ahead was slick, winding, endless. Beside him, Max rested his head on the armrest, ears twitching occasionally toward the sound of the storm. Thomas reached out and ran his hand gently over the dog's fur. "We'll try again," he said softly. "She's my girl. I won't give up." Outside, thunder rolled low across the horizon, echoing like the growl of something ancient and unseen. And behind them, in that silent house, the locked door stood firm, a barrier not just of wood and hinges, but of denial, fear, and all the indifference the world allows when it decides not to look too closely. The storm rolled in from the west, like an angry beast, swallowing the horizon with black clouds and low, growling thunder. Lightning split the sky in white, electric veins, illuminating the quiet Ohio neighborhood for brief, ghostly seconds before plunging it back into darkness. Inside a small cabin on the edge of the forest, Thomas Carter stood by the window, his old hands gripping the curtain. The rain battered the glass in relentless sheets, each drop smearing his reflection, a weary man with eyes that hadn't rested in days. Max, the German shepherd, paced near the door, restless. Every rumble of thunder made his ears twitch. He turned his head toward Thomas, letting out a soft, questioning whine. "Yeah, I feel it too, boy," he muttered. Something's not right. For weeks, that thought had been gnawing at him. That quiet certainty a police officer never truly retires from. Every instinct told him something was wrong. In that house where his granddaughter lived, behind those neat white walls and smiling lies. He had tried to let it go, tried to convince himself Melissa was just overprotective, that Daniel was busy, that Emily was fine. But every night, when the rain whispered against his roof and the world went still, he saw Sarah's face in his dreams, pleading, warning. Now, as the storm thickened, that unease hardened into resolve. He grabbed his coat from the hook, pulled on his boots, and reached for his flashlight. Max watched every move, tail still but eyes alert. "Come on, partner," Thomas said, voice low. "We're going for a drive." Outside, the wind clawed through the trees, bending branches, scattering leaves across the gravel road. Thomas climbed into the truck, Max leaping up beside him. The headlights cut through the darkness, like narrow swords of light. As they drove, rain drummed on the windshield like frantic fingers. Each flash of lightning revealed the skeletal outlines of mailboxes and driveways, each identical, each hiding its own secrets. "Storm like this," Thomas said quietly, "always brings out the truth. People can't hide behind nice lawns and polite smiles when the sky starts shouting." Max gave a low growl deep in his throat, not anger, but awareness. His nose pressed against the crack of the window, sniffing the storm. Across town, at that perfect white house, the same storm raged. Inside, Melissa was unraveling. The thunder had been loud for hours, but it wasn't what made the little girl shake. It was her stepmother's voice, sharp, slurred with fury, and something else, something bitter. "You think you can ignore me now?" Melissa hissed. She slammed a cupboard door, the sound echoing like gunfire. Plates rattled, one fell and shattered. "I said, answer me!" Emily stood in the corner of the kitchen, barefoot, her small hands gripping the hem of her nightgown. Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry." "For what?" I don't know." "Exactly. You never know." Melissa's hand struck the counter. Her eyes glistened, wild, desperate. The eyes of someone who had lost too much and blamed the nearest heart for it. "I do everything for you," she spat. "I cook, I clean, I try to make this house feel normal, and you just sit there, looking at me with those eyes. Her eyes. Your mother's eyes." Lightning lit the room, freezing her face in a flash of blue-white madness. Emily flinched, backing into the corner, whispering through trembling lips, "Please don't be mad. I'll be good." Melissa's voice cracked. "You're never good enough, never quiet enough, never grateful." Thunder crashed outside, shaking the windows. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaked open and slammed shut. In the driveway, headlights cut through the rain. Thomas's truck slowed to a stop at the curb. The wipers smeared the glass, revealing brief glimpses of the house. One upstairs light flickered. Inside the cab, Max lifted his head suddenly, ears rigid. He growled low, deep, primal. Thomas frowned, peering through the rain. "Easy, boy. What is it?" But Max didn't relax. His nose twitched. He whined, then barked once, short, sharp, urgent. That was when Thomas saw it. A shadow moving behind the curtain, fast, chaotic. Then the brief sound of something breaking, a crash muffled by the rain. "Damn it," he muttered, turning off the engine. "Stay here." But Max refused. The moment the door opened, he jumped out, paws splashing through puddles, fur already soaked. "Max!" Thomas shouted, but the wind swallowed his voice. Lightning flashed again, and this time Thomas saw the truth in the windows. A small figure, cornered, a woman towering over her, face contorted with rage. His heart lurched. "Oh, God!" He ran toward the porch, boots sinking in mud. Max was already at the door, barking now, not loud and random, but rhythmic, insistent. The bark of a trained K9 on alert. Inside, Melissa screamed, "Shut up! Shut up, you stupid mutt!" Emily's voice was barely audible. "Please, please stop yelling!" Another crash. Glass shattering. Thomas's hand shook as he pounded on the door. "Melissa! It's Thomas! Open the door!" No response. Only Max's growling and the echo of thunder. He hit the door again. "Melissa!" The wind howled around them, trees bending dangerously close. The rain was relentless, drumming on his shoulders, soaking through his jacket, dripping from his hair into his eyes. And then, silence. Inside, the house went still. Thomas strained to listen, barely hearing over the storm. But something inside him, that old cop instinct, told him he was already too late for calm. "Max," he said, voice low and urgent, "stay ready." The dog stood rigid, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the door. His nose pressed to the crack, sniffing. Then his ears flattened, and a sound came from his throat, a deep, trembling growl that carried something different this time. Not warning, grief. Thomas's chest tightened. "Oh, God! No!" Another flash of lightning, another scream from inside. Max lunged, claws scraping against the door. His body shook with adrenaline. Thomas shouted, "Melissa! Open this door right now!" The house gave no answer. Rainwater pooled around his boots. The thunder rolled directly overhead, shaking the ground. For one long moment, everything seemed frozen. Man, dog, storm, house. Suspended in the unbearable quiet, between lightning and thunder. Then, from inside, a small, choked sound. A cry. A child's cry. Thomas's breath caught. "Emily!" Max barked once, sharp, furious, and rammed the door with his shoulder. It didn't give. Not yet. But the hinges groaned. The storm roared louder. Thomas pressed his palm against the wet wood, voice breaking as he whispered, "Hold on, baby girl. Grandpa's here." Lightning struck again, lighting the whole street. The house stood like a fortress against mercy, its walls holding secrets. The storm itself seemed desperate to expose, and as the thunder followed, rolling, deep, and endless, Max barked once more, louder, stronger, the sound echoing into the night, like a vow. A storm had come to Ohio, but what waited inside was far worse than the weather. The thunder cracked so close, it sounded like the sky itself had split open. Rain slashed against the house, streaming down the windows in crooked rivers. On the porch, Thomas Carter pounded his fist against the front door until the skin split across his knuckles. "Melissa!" he shouted again, his voice nearly drowned by the storm. "Open the damn door!" Inside, silence. Then, a faint thud, a sound that didn't belong to furniture or footsteps. Something heavier, something human. Beside him, Max was pacing in frantic circles, soaked to the bone. His fur clung to his ribs, and his chest rose and fell in short, urgent bursts. Then, suddenly, he froze. Nose lifted, nostrils flaring. Thomas saw it instantly. That look, that shift, the trained focus of a K9 who'd just caught the scent of something terrible. "What is it, boy?" Thomas whispered, but he already knew. Max let out a low, guttural growl that turned into a furious bark, sharp and rapid, a sound Thomas hadn't heard in years, not since their last rescue mission. He lunged at the door, claws scraping against the wood, muscles quivering with instinct. "Max!" Thomas tried to hold him back, but the dog barked again, deeper this time. Desperate. The air seemed to change, thick with something metallic, something unmistakable. Blood. Thomas's heart pounded. "Oh, Jesus!" From inside came a muffled cry, high, weak, fading, a child's voice. "Grandpa, it's time, 600 spum." The sound shattered him. That was all Max needed. With a growl that rolled from his chest like thunder, he launched himself forward. The first hit rattled the hinges. The second split the frame. On the third, the door gave way, splintering open in a burst of wood and rain. "Go, Max!" Thomas shouted, pushing through behind him. The hallway beyond was dim, the air heavy with fear, and the copper tang of blood. The house that once looked perfect now smelled like rot, lies, anger, and something heartbreakingly human. Max sprinted ahead, barking sharply as he turned the corner. His paws slid across the tile, claws scraping for traction. He stopped at the kitchen doorway and barked again, more frantic this time. Thomas followed, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, and then froze. Emily lay on the floor, small and still, her body curled in on itself. Her nightgown was torn at the shoulder. Dark bruises bloomed across her arms and neck, some old, some new. Her face was pale, too pale, except for the streaks of dried blood near her lip. For one horrifying second, Thomas couldn't breathe. Then he was on his knees beside her, trembling hands hovering, before he dared to touch. "Emily, baby girl. Oh God. Please." Max whined, circling her once before lying down beside her. He pressed his nose against her cheek, licking softly, once, twice, then again, as if he could breathe life back into her. Her hand twitched, barely. Thomas's voice broke. "That's it, sweetheart. Come on, stay with me." He fumbled for his phone, wet fingers slipping across the screen. He pressed 911, voice shaking so badly it came out in fragments. This is Thomas Carter, 17 Oak Ridge. Please, child injured, unconscious, send help now." The operator's calm voice bled through the static. "Sir, stay on the line. Is the child breathing?" Thomas bent close, ear near her mouth. For a moment, nothing. Then, a faint, shallow breath. He nearly sobbed with relief. "Yes, barely. Please hurry." "Help is on the way, sir." He dropped the phone, pulling off his jacket to cover her. "You're okay, sweetheart. Grandpa's here." Max stayed beside her, unmoving, his head on her small chest. Every few seconds, he lifted his gaze to Thomas, eyes wide, pleading. The rain from his fur dripped onto the tile, mingling with the crimson beneath Emily's fingertips. "Where's Melissa?" Thomas muttered, scanning the room. He found her a moment later, slumped against the wall, mascara streaked, eyes glassy with shock and fury. A broken wine bottle lay at her feet. She wouldn't listen," Melissa whispered, voice shaking. disconnected. She kept crying. I told her to stop. Thomas's fists clenched. You did this? Melissa stared through him. She made me angry, always looking at me with those eyes. Her mother's eyes. Before he could move, Max stood between them, growling, low and dangerous. The fur along his spine bristled, teeth bared. Thomas's voice was a snarl. Stay where you are. The sound of sirens rose in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder, closer. He turned back to Emily, brushing damp hair from her forehead. You hang on, baby. You're going to be okay. Outside, lightning struck again, bathing the kitchen in a flash of white. For a split second, it looked like a photograph. The old man kneeling over the child, the dog guarding her, the storm howling through the open door. Then, the thunder followed, shaking the walls. Thomas cradled her tiny hand in his. Do you hear that? He whispered. They're coming. Just hold on. Emily stirred faintly, her lips parting. A whisper escaped, soft as breath. Max. The dog whined, licking her fingers gently. That's right, Thomas said, voice breaking. He's here, sweetheart. He's here. Red and blue lights washed across the wet walls as the first police car screeched to a halt outside. Sirens echoed off the houses, sharp and urgent, until the whole street seemed to wake. 2 paramedics rushed in, boots splashing through puddles. Step back, sir, one said quickly, kneeling beside Emily. We've got her. Thomas moved aside, hands trembling, tears mixing with the rain dripping from his hair. He watched as they checked her pulse, lifted her onto a stretcher, and secured the oxygen mask over her tiny face. Max tried to follow when they carried her out, but Thomas caught his collar gently. Not yet, boy. Not yet. He turned once more to look at Melissa. She hadn't moved. An officer was already reading her rights, tone cold and clipped. She didn't fight. She just stared blankly at the floor, whispering something Thomas couldn't hear, over the storm. As the paramedics loaded Emily into the ambulance, Max broke free from Thomas's grip, leaping up and placing his paws on the back step. The medics hesitated, then nodded. Let him come. Max climbed in, settling beside Emily's stretcher. His head rested near her arm, his eyes following every movement as the doors closed. Thomas stood in the driveway, watching through the flashing red lights. His knees gave out, and he sank onto the wet ground, hands over his face. The rain poured down harder now, but he didn't move. He couldn't. All he could see was her small hand lying limp under that oxygen mask, and the old promise he'd made to Sarah, echoing through his mind. I'll take care of her, no matter what. The ambulance pulled away, sirens slicing through the storm. The red lights flickered across Max's eyes one last time, before disappearing down the road. Thomas whispered into the rain. Hold on, baby girl, please. Hold on. The thunder rolled again, but this time, it sounded like a heartbeat. The courthouse was silent, in the way only grief can silence a room. Rain pattered faintly against the tall glass windows, as if the sky itself was watching what unfolded inside. The American flag hung motionless, heavy with moisture and meaning. At the defense table sat Melissa Carter, wrists in cuffs, expression unreadable. Her hair, once perfectly arranged, now hung limp and dull. To her left, Daniel Carter, pale and hollow-eyed, his hands trembling as he clutched a crumpled tissue. Across the aisle, Thomas Carter sat in the front row, one hand resting on his cane, the other holding a photograph of his daughter, Sarah, smiling, alive, and her newborn baby in her arms. At his feet, Max lay quietly, head on his paws, eyes fixed forward. The courthouse had made an exception for him. The judge had agreed. "He's part of the story," Thomas had said simply, and no one had argued. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, strangers, all drawn back to witness the other side of a miracle, the fall of the Ohio miracle girl. The prosecutor stood, voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, the state will now present photographic evidence recovered from the home of Daniel and Melissa Carter." A low murmur spread through the gallery. On the screen behind him, images flickered to life, not gory, but haunting in their quiet detail. A small bedroom with a broken lamp, a torn nightgown, tiny handprints smeared against the wall. Then, a photo of Emily's small wrist, ringed with bruises like faded bracelets. The sound of paper shuffling and muffled sobs filled the air. Thomas gripped the armrest until his knuckles turned white. His chest rose and fell, like it might collapse under the weight of it all. Max, sensing the tremor in his hand, pressed his head gently against Thomas's leg. The prosecutor's voice wavered, just slightly. "These injuries were sustained over several months. The defendant, Melissa Carter, repeatedly denied wrongdoing. But the testimony of the medical team, coupled with statements from the child herself—" "Stop!" Melissa's voice cracked, slicing through the courtroom like glass. She stood suddenly, shaking. "You don't understand. She made me angry. She was her. She looked at me like her. I didn't mean to." The judge's gavel struck sharply. "Mrs. Carter, sit down." Melissa froze, the echo lingering in the air. Then slowly, she sank back into her chair. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her eyes were wet, not from guilt, but from the terrible clarity of someone who could no longer lie to herself. Across the aisle, Daniel began to sob. He covered his face, shoulders shaking. The prosecutor turned to him. "Mr. Carter, you remained silent. You failed to stop the abuse. Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Daniel stood, voice cracking under the weight of shame. "I saw the bruises. I asked once, maybe twice. She always had an explanation. I told myself I was protecting Emily, that if I just kept the peace, it would stop, but it didn't. It got worse." He turned toward Thomas, unable to meet his eyes. "I failed your daughter. I failed my child." Thomas stared, face carved from grief and anger. His jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice trembled. "You didn't fail me, son. You failed her." The room went utterly still. The judge, an older woman, adjusted her glasses. "The court finds Melissa Carter guilty of aggravated child abuse and attempted manslaughter. She is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck again, final, cold. A gasp rippled through the room. Some cried. Others exhaled in relief. Melissa didn't move as the bailiffs approached. Her eyes darted briefly toward Thomas, but he didn't look back. He had already turned toward the door, toward where it mattered most. Because elsewhere, across town, in a hospital room painted pale blue, Emily Carter lay sleeping, under a tangle of white sheets. Her small hand, wrapped in bandages, rested against her chest. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the air, steady, stubborn. alive. Thomas entered quietly, his cane tapping softly against the floor. Max padded beside him, tail low, steps soft as prayer. He sat beside the bed, reaching out to take Emily's hand. Her skin was warm. That alone was enough to make him weep. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered. "They said you might wake up soon. The doctors say you're strong, just like your mama." Max climbed onto the foot of the bed, careful, his weight barely denting the mattress. He lowered his head until his muzzle rested near Emily's legs. For a long while, Thomas said nothing. He just listened. To the rain against the window, the quiet hum of the machines, the heartbeat that refused to stop. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely more than a breath. "It's over now, baby girl. You don't have to be afraid anymore." The fluorescent lights flickered slightly. Outside, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. He pulled Sarah's scarf, the one Emily had clutched all her life, from his pocket. It still smelled faintly of lavender. He laid it gently across her chest. "Your mama's here too," he murmured. "She never really left." Emily's fingers twitched, curling around the edge of the scarf. Her eyelids fluttered. A faint sound escaped her throat, the smallest whisper of life, trying to find its way back. Thomas leaned closer, tears spilling freely now. "That's it, sweetheart. You come back to us." Max lifted his head, ears pricking. His eyes met Thomas's. Old soul to old soul. Then he let out a soft, low bark, as if announcing that she'd heard. A nurse stepped into the doorway, eyes wide. "She's responding," she whispered. "She's really responding." Thomas pressed his forehead against Emily's hand, his voice shaking with gratitude. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." As he wept, Max settled back down, eyes fixed on the girl. His reflection shimmered faintly in the hospital window, red lights from the parking lot flashing across his eyes, like tiny beacons of life. To anyone else, he looked like a dog guarding a child. But to Thomas, and to anyone who truly saw, Max was something more. A witness, a protector. The last piece of truth left standing, in a world that had turned its back. And as the storm outside finally began to ease, Thomas whispered one last time, "You did good, Max. You brought her home." The dog's tail thumped once, soft, sure, faithful, before both of them sat there in silence, listening to the heartbeat of a little girl who refused to fade. Morning broke softly over the Carter property, the kind of morning that felt like forgiveness. The storm was gone. The sky washed clean. The air carried the scent of pine and sunlight. In the backyard, Emily Carter stood barefoot on the soft earth, her small frame glowing with new peace. Her bandages were gone, replaced by faint scars, quiet reminders of what she had survived. "Ready, Max?" she called. The old German shepherd lifted his head, gray now around the muzzle, but steady as ever. Emily threw the bright red ball, the one Thomas had given her in the hospital, and it bounced toward the oak tree. Max trotted after it, slower but sure, returning to drop it at her feet. "Good boy," she whispered, wrapping her arms around his neck. Her laughter, soft, pure, drifted through the air, the first sound of joy this house had heard in years. From the porch, Thomas Carter watched in silence, the sunlight caught in his silver hair, his coffee cooling in his hand. He had dreamed of this moment, not in detail, but in feeling. The miracle of seeing laughter return to a child's face. "Grandpa," Emily waved. Did you see? He caught it. Thomas smiled through the lump in his throat. I saw, sweetheart. He's still got it. Max barked once, as if to agree. She threw the ball again. Max ran after it with a spark that came from something deeper than muscle, something eternal. Thomas leaned back, exhaling. The ache in his chest eased as the yard came alive again. The hum of wind, the song of life continuing. He looked up at the endless blue sky and whispered, She's safe now, Sarah. She's really safe. In his mind, he could almost hear his daughter's voice. Thank you, Dad. When Max returned, he pressed his head against Emily's shoulder. She leaned into him, her hand resting on his fur. You're my hero, she murmured. You saved me. Thomas swallowed hard. The world had called Max a hero. Retired police dog saves miracle girl. But to him, Max was more. He had saved all of them. From grief, from silence, from forgetting how to love. Thomas rose slowly and crossed the yard, his cane sinking into the damp grass. Emily ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Grandpa, can Max stay with us forever? Thomas knelt beside her and smiled. Oh, sweetheart, I don't think he's ever leaving. Emily kissed Max's head. The dog sighed, deep, content. His body finally at rest. The home was whole again. A butterfly landed on Emily's hand. Look, Grandpa, maybe it's Mommy. Thomas smiled through tears. Maybe it is. He looked at Max, golden in the sunlight. He didn't need wings to be an angel, he whispered. Just a heart that knew how to love. As Emily drifted to sleep beside her faithful friend, Thomas whispered, You can rest now, boy. You did your job. Max's ear twitched, as if he understood. The storm had passed. In its place bloomed something greater, peace, and love reborn. Sometimes, it's the quiet ones who save us. Max reminded us that love doesn't always come wrapped in words. Sometimes it walks on four paws, waits by the door, and never gives up when the world does. German shepherds have a way of carrying both courage and tenderness in the same heartbeat, teaching us that loyalty isn't just a word, it's a way of living. If this story touched something in you, maybe take a little time to deepen that bond with your own dog. There's a wonderful resource I've been using myself, one that helps strengthen trust and communication between owners and their companions. You can take a look if it feels right for you. No rush, no pressure, just something worth exploring when your heart says so. Because in the end, it's not about training tricks or commands. It's about listening, really listening, to the one friend who loves you more than words ever could.